Today's episode is brought to you by the letter I. Welcome to UberCube, the podcast we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and I'm joined by my other host.
Hello, this is Stu, aka Still Just Stu.
And we have a very special guest. It's our Pauper God, Peasant God, etc. extraordinaire, recently at CubeCon featured.
Chris Moore, aka Sandwich. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, welcome back. I appreciate it. When I say today's episode is brought to you by the letter I, this particular episode should explain what we're going to talk about. It's Anthony Learns What Initiative Is. I was recently taught by Chris, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And we'll kind of get to that. We'll distill down to what this means in the very near future here. But before we go any further, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to enjoy our libations of the show. And let's start out with our esteemed guest.
Oh, yes. I'm having some 12-year Glenmorangie scotch. It's very good.
Nice. Yeah, today, I suppose I'll say for both of us. So Anthony was kind enough yesterday to give me a ride over to our little Thursday night magic. And in return, I got us some, this is a Deep River Brewing Company, 4042 Chocolate Stout. This is a local brewery and the beer is absolutely sensational. So yeah, this is one of my favorites.
Absolutely. My favorite place to actually ride my bike, Deep River. It's coming out of the river is really hard.
Except
going
here.
Down that hill.
You'd much rather ride here. Not tonight, which was kind of
I did ride tonight, actually.
Someone
stole Anthony's keys. Yeah. All right, let's crack up.
But he loves his wife.
I love my wife very much.
All right. So first of all, and I'm not going to say that I'm super mad about this, but there was a time, if you recall, a few months ago, where I was discussing this with Anthony. We discussed initiative, and I said to you, Anthony, these initiative cards are really, really powerful. I think you should put them inside your vintage cube. I think they belong there. And Anthony said, no. I don't like anything to do with initiative.
Sub
I don't want that in my cube.
Whole episode
I don't
about
want this sub game. We do. Go check that out. But yeah, so basically Anthony just went overnight, it seems, from being a hater, like card-carrying hater of initiative, to being an enjoyer, like a supporter of initiative. And I'm interested to see like what the mentality and the situation was, right? Because obviously this is from a game between you two guys. But it shows kind of the mentality because Anthony, apparently this didn't go too well for you. So
this is a backstory. There's an origin story to everything, right? And about my card that I had it laminated at Walgreens, my hate card for sub games. But let me explain. Our good friend Christian, love me some Christian. All three of us love us some Christian. He likes to experiment with everything, Commander. I mean, whatever comes out, whatever pre-con, whatever crazy nonsense comes across the table, he will put it on there. And
I think Magic in general.
Like it doesn't matter.
He's a commander guy. He plays
Canlander, doesn't
cube,
matter.
Yeah.
It's like whatever for him. Planes Chase, let's go.
Exactly.
But he had this one particular, this was the Dungeons deck, and he had this EDH deck, and he was very proud of this deck, and it had the 3 dungeons, and I'm not going to talk about these 3 dungeons, but what was really exciting to him is he had this little Darth Vader Micro Machines character, and maybe like a Yoda, that he would put on these 3 large dungeonscapes that he would lay in front of everybody. He would even be so kind as to give everyone one, as if I'm going to do the additional mental tasking to try to trace this. It wasn't like I could pull out a Sharpie and start going, well, he went here, and I'm going to circle here, and now he's here. There was no way for to trace this. I had to look across the table regardless of whether or not I could look upon my dungeon that he had provided me. In a nutshell, this put a sore taste in my mouth for a lot of reasons. One, it was the extra game pieces, kind of additive distraction to the game, looking across the table in an EDH type format, trying to figure out where Darth Vader is currently and why do I even care? And then ultimately, with the dungeons, he would say, well, I'm going to make a 4/4 in the Dungeon of the Mad King or so, whatever it was, right? It would be like, and I'd be like, whatever. That was a lot of build up for a whole lot of nothing, right?
I will agree, and I would say that when I first saw this, we played the same game. Right? I recall the game. We were playing it in my dining room, and I had this kind of, and more game pieces, more complication to this commander game. I've already got enough to take care of and keep track of with what's going on in my board and everyone else's board, and now the stuff outside the board. So I was initially a little, I don't know about it. Chris, I want to ask you, take me through your journey, your psychological journey through when initiative was spoiled to where we are today, because this is a fairly recent addition to your own vintage cube, correct?
Yes, I was kind of in the mindset of Anthony. I didn't want the extra game pieces. I personally don't like the dungeon mechanic. There's too many extra cards you have to have for people for the dungeon mechanic. Because if everyone goes, they can choose whatever dungeon they want to go to. You automatically get access to all three of the dungeons when you say you move through the dungeon. That would mean like for 8 people, you'd have to have so many extra dungeon cards just in case they happen to get that dungeon delver card. Initiative's a little different in that I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos of people playing vintage Power Cube, and I've been seeing a lot of initiative, and I'm like, well, that looks really fun actually in that kind of environment. So I experimented. I had like 3 of them, and they were pretty good. Like the 3 of the rare ones that out of the Baldur's Gate set. I can't remember which ones. There's a green, a white, and a red one. And I'm sure we'll talk.
We're gonna build up to them.
Exactly.
That kind of segues into what I was going to mention. Yeah. A lot of this misconception I had is whenever the Undercity came out, the initiative card,
right.
It was later advertised to me as another dungeon, and I went, oh my God, not another dungeon. Didn't even read the card. It was the 4th dungeon in my mind. That's immediately what I heard. So I just went off of that. This is where, when you're talking about the various colors of cards that says take the initiative, do the initiative, whatever, right? As I'm looking at them, never even looked at the Undercity, not once. Didn't even care to look at it because the other 3 dungeons from Christian's little Darth Vader had stained the playing field for me. So this 4th dungeon's now come out. So it says take the initiative, blah, 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 do something. It's got vigilance. And I'm thinking to myself, and this is Anthony Learns About the Initiative episode, I'm thinking to myself, this creature costs 4, it's got vigilance, and it's white, and it says take the initiative. What is so great about this? It has vigilance, whatever. Not adding this card to my vintage Power Cube. Absolutely not. And since then, Chris, tell us about this match we just had the other day. This is where the Believer came online.
Right. Well, it's like I think the draft started out, I got like a Mox first pick or something. And then I second picked the Feywild Caretaker. Just because it was the best card in the pack by a mile, but you passed it to me, which made it even better.
Yep.
And
cost 5.
Passed it to me. Right.
Blue. Yes. Take the initiative. Something. Don't know.
Right. So I think what Anthony was missing about the initiative was that it happens literally every upkeep you have the initiative.
Didn't understand it.
Right. Exactly. Fast forward, it's game 3, I think. And this is one where I play land, Mox, Talisman, Mana Vault on turn 1. I mean, it was a crazy first turn. And then turn 2, I'm like, Feywild Caretaker, 2 mana open. And then Anthony goes, oh, well, I'm going to Phantasmal Image that. I'm like, no, I'm going to Mana Leak that. And it's just it was so poorly for him.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it wasn't much of a contest after that turn. Is that somewhat accurate?
Well, so ultimately what this boils down to, and we're gonna read these cards to make this make a lot more sense. But let's talk about what the initiative is. I'm gonna attempt to take this on the best I can. And if you see me bobble, please pick up, run, and carry. The initiative. Whenever one or more creatures a player controls deals combat damage to you, that player takes the initiative. Whenever you take the initiative and at the beginning of your upkeep, venture into the Undercity. If you're in a dungeon, and this is what got me right here, the word dungeon, immediately dismiss this, never flip this card over, dungeon, just for, I'm defending myself here.
You were dungeon visioned.
I was dungeon visioned by Darth Vader running up and down the way. Darth Vader did.
And Yoda.
So I never flipped this card over. I'm like, I'm not doing this again. But the Undercity, and I'm like, that is so many words. Did not realize how good these words are. It changed the entire face dynamic of these cards that we're going to talk about, where I read, this card's just got vigilance. What else? I'm not taking this card. Stupid. Pass to Chris. Now I'm reading this card, and this is Chris's lines. It's a pretty straightforward line. And it was, search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle. I'm like, okay, whatever. Then the next one was, the Forge, put 2/1/1 counters on target creature. His 5 whatever suddenly becomes a 7 whatever, and I'm like, oh God, I'm taking 12 life in 2 turns. I'm like, what is happening? Mm-hmm. And then the next one, he just goes, it's a trap. And he target player loses 5 life. And I'm dead. He doesn't even have to finish the dungeon.
No.
He went through 3 steps.
3 steps.
It's because in this particular matchup, as he mentioned, we were Storm. We were Storm versus Storm. But he grabbed 2, 3 initiative cards.
Two.
Just enough, right? Just enough that my
Yeah.
storm package couldn't actually retake the initiative. And this is where Anthony learns all about the initiatives, too. You were selling this to me forever ago.
I was.
And how did you come to know how good this was in particular?
So you will know, as I've mentioned on previous podcast episodes, that I don't know if I would consider myself a student of the game, but I am definitely a consumer of the game. I am a consumer of content, as much content as I can get, and especially anything cube related, right? So I'll watch. You've got all the celebrities, you've got your chill MTGs, everyone knows all the popular vintage cube content creators out there on Twitch and YouTube. And I really did just notice immediately upon the release of these cards that they were just showing up everywhere. All the vintage cube lists, certainly the Magic Online vintage cube list, had all of these cards. Actually, I don't know if Farewell Caretaker. I'm trying to remember if that was in the very, very first one, or if it was just like Seasoned Dungeoneer and White Plume Adventure. Either way. But I saw these cards show up very early. I was like, man, that seems very an interesting, new sub-game, right? We've got Monarch and these other sub-gamey effects that happen. But I'm interested to see how this one goes, right? All I'd seen of it previously was this one game of Commander that we played with Christians. But now I'm seeing it in a 1v1 environment where it's much more streamlined. And I was sold instantly. The value of being able to get even just a couple of steps through the dungeon, getting that land that you need, getting the fixing, even the scry is very strong. The options that you have, sometimes just putting 2+1/+1 counters on a creature is enough to send you to victory. Exactly what Chris did, right? Sometimes you might need to think, okay, well, maybe the scry is going to be a bit more useful for me. So you go through that route. So for me, it was so demonstrated very early on. And I just saw the power in it very quickly. And I thought, Vintage Cube, they've got to be there.
Yeah. So one of the things you've heard us say a couple times was the word Commander being multiplayer, right? And I wanted to reference a good friend of mine that recently started a podcast that they kind of talk about this subject, and they kind of hit the nail on the head. And I do recommend you go listen to this one. This is a shout out for Squares That Cube, the podcast, and specifically our good friend Alex on our MTG Facebook drafting page happens to run that show, and he mentioned a correlation on most of these cards, and this be the initiative and whatnot. Most of these cards are multiplayer-centric type cards, Commander format cards that we as curators, Chris and I specifically running Powered Vintage List, oftentimes try to capitalize on a card that wasn't designed for that. And Alex really just made that statement as they started listing off cards, and I know we know it, but they kind of went down the path of talking about this, and it'd be cards like Lelia and Fractured Identity, which we know those were never designed for the formats that we're using them before. But once they get face-off 1v1, these become devastating. Initiative was never designed to do this. Monarch was never designed for these type of 1v1 type of environments. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I totally agree, which is why I feel like I feel like mechanics like Initiative, Monarch, that sort of thing are very powerful, and they are designed for multiplayer. I don't run these in any other cube. Like, only cube I run this in is my power cube. I feel like they can run away with games in lower power environments where things are all flat. The power level's a lot flatter. I'm sure you agree, Anthony, with that.
100%.
I don't think you run any of these in yours. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, the fact they were designed for multiplayer, because we actually did quite a few drafts of the Battle for Baldur's Gate set. And the initiative is fun as hell in there. It is so fun to try to snipe it. I got a little one game. I had like a little 1/1 flyer that could snipe the initiative from people, kind of thing. It was really, really fun to do that.
These type of cards
totally agree
are
with that.
designed to incentivize combat. I mean, that's what they do for games like Commander. That's where the Monarch happens. Yes, it's card draw advantage, but it's encouraging the game to actually come to a conclusion instead of people trying to... It wants creatures to turn sideways. And it's a great design mechanic. And we talk about this extensively during our subgames episode, but I will say that my attitude towards the initiative has changed since seeing this in the play. And now you did put a specific pin in this, and you said these are exceptionally powerful. So as I say, I like these, and I thought these are great. It's because that rule zero type of attitude about a powered vintage cube where I sit down to face off against my opponent, there is an accepted level of the degenerate. I don't want to use the word degenerate. Degenerate's the way you would call it outside of that format. But things are the old way of playing, the Power 9 and all these things, right? This can actually run right side by side of these ideas. These type of cards can sit there with the mix and booze the Okos, and all these high-powered cards, Library of Alexandria. I'm not saying they're the same. I'm just saying that they can exist in the same hemisphere. And when I see these type of cards, if you're, in my opinion, and my opinion changes every year, but for now, I would say these cards that we're going to talk about, I personally, as a curator, would not place them outside of a multiplayer type cube environment, like a commander type cube or something you wanted to do that, and or a powered vintage cube or something really high powered that could actually handle. It doesn't have to have power 9 to be able to have this, but it needs to be strong, right? Because you need to have answers for this. Do you have the same thoughts on that one, Stu?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So one of the cards that I had, this goes back to the Anthony Learns About Initiative. I've heard over and over again, like this, White Plume Adventure, which we're going to talk about here in a second, that's in Legacy. And I heard all these people putting it in their Power Vintage cubes. When I glanced across the Moto list, it was in there. And every time I looked at it, I just saw basically it's 2 colorless, 1 plains for a 3/3 Orc Cleric. And whenever White Plume Adventure enters the battlefield, you take the initiative, immediately dismissing that because it's a dungeon and I'm not going to read it. This is where the error has happened. At the beginning of your opponent's upkeep, untap a creature you control. If you completed a dungeon, untap all creatures you control instead. I truthfully saw no value in this card after looking at the list of the dungeons and the different permutations and choices that you make and the paths and not wanting to deal with that, thinking that this is something that just would not occur. I guess I simply didn't understand how rapidly you would move through this, not understanding how the initiative works. So would you mind explaining the initiative one more time, how the mechanic functions, Chris, please? Teach me.
Basically, when you play a creature that gives you the initiative, you take the initiative, you get that emblem that says you have the initiative, and basically says, as soon as you hit that initiative, you move into the Undercity, or you move into the next room in the Undercity. And then what makes it even more powerful is, because I think with just regular dungeons, you have to move through them with an effect.
That's what I thought was happening here. That's where the sharp misunderstanding came from.
Right. But initiative, every upkeep that you have the initiative, you move to the next room. So you, in theory, can move through a dungeon very rapidly if you have multiple initiative creatures. Because let's say you play 1 initiative the turn before, next upkeep, still have the initiative, you move to the next room. Play another creature with initiative, it'll move to the next room. So it's very powerful, and at least that's the way that's how I understand it.
And see, you can see where I was misled, latching onto the original dungeons, watching Darth Vader, watching Christian do his playstyle. He would play a card, and it would say, proceed in the dungeon. And it would take him, if you recall, to move through the 5 different choices down that linear path. It would take him 5, 6 different spells to make this happen. So when I saw the Undercity and I saw this card, literally mystified when I see you start traveling through this like a time traveler, warping through it, and I'm like, what in the hell is happening? That was literally my expression, is like, give me that card. I need to read that card now. Like, how in the hell have you suddenly got a land and 2 counters and doing nothing? And he's like, oh, this is how the initiative works. I'm like, oh my God, it's not clean.
Something important to note as well, based on what you just said, White Plume Adventurer is banned in Legacy.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you said that, because it was so strong. It's banned. So that kind of gives you an idea of a power level. Like, it's not vintage banned or restricted or whatever, but even for a card to be banned in Legacy, like, that kind of gives you an idea that is a pretty powerful mechanic.
But you can see where, again, Anthony learns, but Magic is a hard game. And we talked about this during our sub-games episode. And now you've got 2 different types of dungeons, and they've made more layers and accessibility concerns. Some of this was my choice. Maybe ignorance is bliss in my story that I'm telling you. I was jaded by the first 3, but nothing distinguished the 4th one for me as a user in the game. You guys knew it. Stu knew it from watching content. You knew it from probably actually reading the card. But I didn't see a differentiation between these cards. It was just a 4th, another tick, 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 and never understanding why this was so powerful. I can see where the ignorance, that's not the good word. In my case, it was ignorance, not understanding the fundamentals of how strong this mechanic is.
Maybe you just didn't want to include a suite of cards with extra game pieces.
I do now.
I know. Maybe so, but maybe that was part of the mentality, because if you remember, and again, we always try and reference older episodes of the podcast, we had gone through quite a lot of discussion about sub-games. We talked about this quite a lot. And the overwhelming opinion from yourself, as well as other curators that we've spoke to, either at CubeCon or wherever else, was quite mixed. You know, there was a lot of support for things like Monarch in a vintage environment. And a lot of people said, oh, I really like this sub-game, really like Monarchy. And we were like, yeah, sometimes it's good, sometimes not so much. Really depends on the situation. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it was just a mentality thing that you kind of had a bit of sour grapes about it based on some of those sub-gaming. And we were playing a lot of Commander as well back then. And Commander is not a favorite of ours anymore. It's kind of been taken over by Cube. And maybe it's just not as fun in a 4-player environment where you've already got all these game pieces that you've got to keep track of. So, I don't know.
Yeah, so it's additional game pieces. It's keeping it as a curator, finding a place to keep it, binders, all the things on top of that. It's the mental tasking while you're doing it, tracking it. But if you're going to ask yourself, why did I suddenly turn a new leaf on this? Just because Chris has streamlined his power cube, and I'm currently refixturing my entire power cube based on this. Mine's going to remain 540 because we want some differentiation in our environments. But in his case, it's really powerful. And, we've talked about it. He's added Storm Package, which we'll talk about on a future episode, etc. But something about this just felt strangely right. Like it was like the creatures are actually challenging like me trying to storm off. That was exciting because I've got this. I wasn't allowed just to play Magic by myself anymore. It actually, for me in this particular game, uniquely changed. Storm didn't feel so me playing alone. Like I literally was forced to play halfway Storm where I had to throw Snappy in front of it to stop the creature to attempt to take the initiative because I couldn't storm off. It like literally made me segment my Storm chasing components, if that makes sense. So it created this whole like wild dynamic in a game that normally would be like, I'm going to storm off, I'm going to tendrils you, I'm going to hit these 9-10 spells and you're dead, right? I didn't get to do that because I couldn't allow this to stick. It created threat on board, and it was really wild, and it changed the face of what would normally be a solitaire type game, and I think that's what really intrigued me as a player. So
it definitely forces interaction, right?
It forced interaction.
And I think with a Storm deck where you draft a 40-card deck where you're trying to storm off, there's going to be a lot of enablers. You're looking for fast mana, tutors, the payoffs, all that kind of stuff in more of a mid-range, more of a fair deck, which obviously a White Plume Adventurer, it's a creature that you play. It doesn't win you the game. It's an incremental benefit, but I think it is more of a mid-rangey kind of card, right? You're looking to win over a few turns rather than just in one turn like you are with Storm. So for something like that, I think you're forcing a different level of interaction between the players. And I think this is why I enjoy cards like this so much, because you are almost enforcing your will on the game, where now you're forcing your side of the interaction. And if you've got someone else on the other side that's either playing another kind of mid-rangey deck or a Storm deck, now you're forcing them to play their own kind of interaction as well. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons why I love it so much, because all I see when I see these kind of cards played, the same as it is with Monarch, you're forcing this tension, like you always like to say, right? Where, if you ever played a Palace Jailer and exiled someone's card and all of a sudden that's like, the room goes silent. And now that monarchy token that's sitting right there, the whole game, like I'm just flicking my eyes to it every few seconds. Like if it's on the other side, like I gotta get that monarchy token. How do I get that?
You gotta get that monarchy, bro.
I'm scratching like Dave Chappelle on the side of my neck. Like, so yeah, love it.
Stu, would you mind taking on this next one? We're going to save that third one for Chris. It's very special.
Yeah, so this is Seasoned Dungeoneer, 3 colorless and a white for a creature human warrior. 3/4, when it enters the battlefield, you take the initiative. Whenever you attack, target attacking cleric, rogue, warrior, or wizard gains protection from creatures until end of turn. It explores.
Yeah, so
Tell me that ain't Value Town.
This is Value Town. And again, as I looked at this, I saw a 3/4 for 4 that I had to have all these different typals, specifically clerics, rogues, whatever, basically the Fey Cube in so many words, right? And then it explores. Because I skipped right over that initiative word like a speed bump. Again, going, why is this in a powered vintage list?
You're like, this is flavor text. You're like, this is flavor text.
Yeah, it explores. That's cool, bro. That's a literally cool story. You explore.
There's no Darth Vader or Yoda tokens here. We're going to ignore that.
And what's interesting about that is the cleric, rogue, warrior, and wizard is all these, as we talk about it, the vast majority of them, with exception one that'll be a barbarian that's on this list, they get protection, which is really gross because they kind of stymie you from retaking the initiative on that. That's what was kind of happening.
Or they just allow you to more easily take the initiative back.
Yeah, so Chris, you actually mentioned something during our game that was interesting, and I've been ruminating on this one. It was playing a deck that has an initiative can be dangerous. As in, you have to keep the initiative. It's very risk reward driven. It's like the Monarch, right? Like you could throw it out there, but if you don't have a way to stop the oncoming swaths of, turn sideways armies, etc., or they remove your one blocker, the game could really turn sideways on you, like exceptionally quick. All this benefit driven stuff. I think that's an interesting dynamic to the game too.
Yeah, because if you're playing a heavy creature or even a deck with heavy removal, you're going to have a lot of problems keeping that initiative, but that's what I like about it because it makes it more fun. It adds that tension that Stu had mentioned earlier, which I think is really fun, and it just can go back and forth. If you build your deck right, it might not go back and forth, which is why it can kind of take over the game sometimes, as you got to experience.
Yeah. Anthony's over here building a lone storm, passing every word that said initiative to Chris, who built. This is the irony of this, and we're going to talk about. Let's take a little break to talk about this little matchup. Yeah. It was hysterical. So I'm doing the Tendrils matchup, and I can't figure out where I passed Brain Freeze. I've been taking everything Storm, and then suddenly Brain Freeze doesn't come back. And we're doing a Glimpse type draft where he's burning one, so I'm thinking, okay, maybe he just didn't want to deal with it. He burned it. Well, Chris had taken it. And this is the worst nightmare for a Storm player, is to have a sorcery speed Storm count and then have a person on the other side of the table who's also secretly counting Storm count with Brain Freeze. I'm like, Storm count 9, and he's like, Storm count 10 soon. So that created a level of tension. But on top of that, because of my lack of defensive structure, because I did do the linear type style of storming off, I was playing solo Magic, at least I thought I was, and you having the initiative creatures to supplement your plan, I guess your plan B to your Brain Freeze type stuff, because you were basically doing the minus the LED.
Yeah, no LED was in the draft that I saw.
Yeah, you were trying to self-mill yourself. You were self-milling yourself, which you did successfully, but you also had creatures to back you up. So once you took the initiative, there was zero chance of me ever taking the initiative back. So bad situation for me all around. I had to storm out even faster. I'm like, oh my God. So I thought it was such a dynamic.
I think I also had Retrofitter Foundry to help me out with that too. So
yeah, nothing was helping me in this story, which leads me to this next card that also would have never made Anthony's list based on skipping the word initiative as we read this. Chris, would you mind taking over this card and talk about how this just changed my life?
Yeah, it's my favorite little orc wizard. It's a Feywild caretaker for 4 and a blue. 3/4. When he enters the battlefield, take the initiative, which is pretty awesome. But the best part is, at the beginning of your end step, if you have the initiative, create a 1/1 blue fairy dragon creature with flying token. So not only does it get to, you take the initiative and, draw a card. It's a land, but you're drawing a card, basically. And then you get to make a 1/1 to protect it. It's wonderful.
So through my rose-tinted lenses, as I read this card the first time when it came out, I'm like, well, that costs 5 for a 3/4 for a not-so-great Whirler Rogue that has something to do with a dungeon that I refuse to read.
Not so great Whirler Rogue?
Yeah. That's what I saw. I'm like, who's going to pay 5 for this goofy thing?
You heard this here.
Oh, my God. This card just obliterated me. Not, in a Powered Vintage Cube, we talked about his Ultra fair turn, right? Like where he busted out like 4 mana rocks on turn 1. So it was fair Cheater McCheaterson over there across the table.
I think that's not to be overstated as well, right? I think any time you're able to play land, marks, signet, mana crypt on turn 1 into a 3-power flyer with another effect, even a Whirler Rogue, okay, sure, maybe you're going to get a bit of value out of that. So, but yeah, that's a pretty broken start.
And the comedy of this is I wanted to take this initiative back, but this thing kept making these little 1/1 blue fairy dragon creatures that absolutely refused to let me take it back. Even when I took it one time, I'm like, boop, get a land. He's like, well, boop. And there was no more booping after that. Literally one-sided, putting counters on everything, nonsense, take 5. It was insane. I'm like, oh my God, who made this card? Impressed. Actually, this one was probably my favorite out of the lot because it did cost 5 mana and you had to work pretty hard for it. But another thing that you and I were having conversationally about this is our belief, mostly yours, but I agree with you, but for different reasons, that Bitter Blossom's kind of on its last kind of stand, right? It's starting to fall out. In your particular environment, Bitter Blossom's not starting to do a whole lot of nothing at this point.
Right, it's because I cut all the stacks effects. You know, I cut things like braids and smokestack, and it's just really slow, and it's just that I don't really have a sacrifice deck in there anymore. So that's part of the issue that I kind of have with it. And, it's just a little slow. It's starting to show its age. It's still a good card. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the card. It makes little 1/1 flyers that are kind of useful. But it works good with, like, Skull Clamp and stuff like that. I was going to
say, is it kind of Skull Clamp or Bust nowadays for a bit of a
Kinda. And, it's, like I said, it's still, I believe, a good card, but it's just not quite where it was. It's like Jace the Mind Sculptor is not nearly as good as he used to be. He's still a good card, but he's not first pickable anymore.
No.
Yeah, so it kind of, I run Yawgmoth. That's my defensible stance right now for that card. But why this came up is because of the comparison that we made looking at this particular Feywild Caretaker as it started to proverbial poop out these 1/1 fairies or 1/1 dragons or whatever they are, kept coming out over and over again. I'm like, oh my God, this is like Bitter Blossom with no downside. And you're getting to tick up through this dungeon rapidly. There was no way for me to take this game back. I even tried, as you mentioned, I tried to not Phyrexian Metamorph, but which one did I do?
Phantasmal Image.
Yeah, and you wouldn't allow that to happen. That was my only even way to get out of the situation, is to 1-for-1 the Air Force. I mean, this thing was nuts. But yeah, this card, I loved everything about this card. I thought it was interesting because it cost 5 mana. It's a 3/4. It's just got interesting stats. It's strangely, I'd be curious to the listeners. This is going to be kind of an audience participation question, but based on that 1 blue and 4 colorless, are you going to run this in your powered vintage list? Because I'm telling you, this card was... I really just put me back on the back of my heels immediately. It was my favorite out of the lot. Most interesting one.
Nice.
Cool story, bro.
Yeah, I do like it. Okay, so I'm going to take the next one because maybe this is the one that I am the biggest fan of, okay? And this is Caves of Chaos Adventurer, 3 colorless and a red, creature human barbarian 5/3. Trample, enters the battlefield, take the initiative. Whenever Caves of Chaos Adventurer attacks, exile the top card of your library. If you've completed a dungeon, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. Otherwise, you may play that card this turn. I love Cheaty McCheetah Face cards, and this is just a really cool, like, slot machine-y kind of card, right? I always like these. I have a Grenzo Dungeon Warden. I know that we've kind of referenced Commander quite a lot in this episode. I have a Grenzo Dungeon Warden Commander deck, which is super fun to me because it's kind of a slot machine where you're just pulling cards off the bottom of your library and who knows what's going to happen. But this is kind of a similar kind of thing, right? You get to take that card off the top. Maybe it's a card you can play this turn. Maybe it's not, whatever. There's just a bit of illusion, bit of suspense about it. I think this card's incredible.
Yeah. This one actually beat me to death, too. This is actually the first card that killed me in the matchup. So, because, again, he's over there running some Is It nonsense, and I'm like, whatever. I didn't know he had brain freeze at the time. I didn't know what was going on. I'm going to storm off, and I'm literally loading up. I'm getting all these cards. I'm like, tendrils, getting it. Okay, I'm ready to fire off. And then he attacks me with a 5/3, takes the initiative, and I'm like, well, whatever, sure, whatever that is. And then he gets a land, and I'm like, where'd you get that from? And I'm like, you didn't rampant growth. He goes, that's what it says on this. I was like, what? It says it right there? Yeah, get a land. I'm like, okay. Cool, whatever. Just didn't even look at it anymore. I'm like, sure, okay, cool. Gonna storm off, and then I'm building up to it. I'm about to wheel, and then he attacks again, and he goes putting 2 1/1 counters on it. Hits me for 7/3, and I'm like, how did you do that? And he goes, it says right here on this card. Read this dungeon right here. And I'm like, I'm not reading a dungeon. There's no Darth Vader marking where you're at. I don't understand what's happening. He goes, I chose this path right here. I'm like, oh, okay. And then the next one, he goes, well, take 5 life. I go, how did you do that? Did you just lava axe me? He goes, no, it's right here on this card. Read this card right here. Say, I chose this path right here. I'm like, dude, who made this card?
And it's crazy going back to what you said, right? You haven't completed a dungeon.
Hasn't done anything.
You've played a creature.
He shredded me.
You've maybe attacked a couple of times, but already you've ramped,
Yep.
right? You got yourself a land, powered up a creature, and dealt 5 damage to someone. Like, how much is that worth just from a pure mana
He hit me for 5, then he hit me for 7, and then he hit me for 5. It was insanity, and I couldn't figure out where this is coming from. I'm looking for a lava axe. I'm looking for a rampant growth. Can't figure out when anything's happening. Anthony learns.
So you remember on the initiative card, I'm going to take a sidebar here. We played the initiative in another deck, in another draft that I don't think, Anthony, you were there for this. We played it, and I had Feywild Caretaker again, and I was playing against our good friend Nathan. No, I'm sorry. I was playing against David. I finished that dungeon. Okay, if you look at the last room, it's where you look at the top 10.
Is that all?
And
Throw to the dead 3?
Yeah. You reveal the top 10. Put a creature card from among them onto the battlefield with 3 plus some counters on it, and it gains hexproof until your next turn.
Not bad.
Well, I start flipping, and I hit a Troxa. So,
Oh my God.
I know how.
So you get
So
a
I know
10,
I have a
10.
10-10 Atraxa with hexproof.
And a
I drew
Traxa
like
trigger.
6 cards. And I drew like 6 cards. I drew like
Gross.
6 cards.
Yeah, so the initiative pretty powerful. Read the cards. So this next one, I actually like this next one a lot. But let's do this one the way I saw it through my rose tinted lenses again, because these cards came out. Everybody's talking about it. This is Stu telling me in the Wayback Machine, Anthony, you need to add these cards. I'm like, Under Mountain Adventure for 3 colorless and 1 forest creature giant warrior vigilance for a 3/4. You tap it, you add 2 green, so it's a mana dork. If you completed a dungeon, I'm not doing a dungeon. I'm not reading stupid dungeons. Add 6. That seems like no. I'm not adding that to my powered vintage cube. Absolutely not, Stu. I remember saying that at one point.
You did.
I did.
You said that for all of these cards. All of them. And you know what's crazy is I can almost see it with Under Mountain Adventurer, right? Because you're getting a pretty good payoff to tap and add double green. Tap and add 6 mana. That's pretty serious business right there, right? That's not just a mana dork anymore. That's a mana monster. But you're still getting the initiative. Like, I almost feel like you're going back to the flavor text thing. That tap to add double green, as incredibly powerful as that is, that could almost be flavor text. Who cares? You got a 3/4 vigilance, and you get to start going through the Undercity. I'm about that. I don't care about the mana ability.
Which I refuse to read because Darth Vader is not there pointing it out to me in the middle of a commander game with our good friend Christian. This is where all this started from. It's the Christian, I love you. It's your fault. Darth Vader's fault and Christian's fault, ultimately. I refuse.
Well, I'd like to add another card that you don't have listed in the show notes, but I think it'd be really good. And I think I do need to add this to my cube. And I've been looking at it. It's called From the Catacombs. I'm not sure if people are aware of this one.
Yes.
But it's a sorcery from the
card?
Catacombs for 3 and 2 black. It says, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control with a corpse counter on it. If that creature would leave the battlefield, exile it. So you don't get to get it again. But it says you take the initiative is on there. That flavor text that Anthony was mentioning earlier. But then it has something cooler. It has escape for 3 and 5 as well. And you exile 5 other cards from your graveyard. So you get to keep casting this from the graveyard. It's expensive, but it's actually a really cool little initiative card that acts as like a for Reanimator. So it's just a really neat card that I've seen on, as Stu has mentioned, other content creators use it to great effect, and it seems to be pretty good.
It's a pretty premium reanimate effect, right? Don't get me wrong. I love my animate deads. I love Exhume. But From the Catacombs is a very, very strong effect. Like you say, it's expensive. 5 mana's no joke. But you get that reanimate effect. It's repeatable, and you get the initiative. And Anthony, I don't know if we've talked about this much during this episode, but the initiative is pretty strong. Were you aware of that? I don't know if we've drilled that point home quite enough throughout the last few minutes but either way, but it gives you that, so it's good.
This episode's been brought to you by the letter I. So that was the one to wrap that one up, what you said. I actually had that in my Star City Games cart as well, not affiliated, but that's the one that has like the squid spaghetti monster on it. I just thought it would be
I want
neat.
to get. I don't have one yet, but I want to get
I thought
one.
it was pretty cool. I was going to pick it up, but here is our final thoughts, because this is every time we play Magic, we learn a little something, right? That's what we do, right? We learn from our friends. We learn from just getting totally wrecked when you're trying to solo out on Storm and your buddy realizes that I've been passing every card that says this flavor text initiative that, well, I'm probably going to lose. And he even mentions after the game, and I want to point this out. This is one of my things that was actually the top. And I'm going to call Chris out a little bit here. This is home field advantage at its finest. The curator knows that I've now passed 3 or 4 of these things and knows how much I viscerally hate the idea of dungeons. Like, this isn't something that's unknown to Chris, yet he secretly just scoops them all up and then goes, I gotta show him that guy. This is So Chris, if you'd like to offer your public apology now, that'd be fantastic.
No, as a matter of fact, I'm waiting for yours.
Yeah, let's be honest, Anthony. You have been making fun of people for reading the flavor text on Magic cards for so long.
This is karma,
and now it's kind of come back. And
this came back around and kicked me in the rear pretty hard.
Yes, it did.
So it's kind of like reads the card, explains the cards is really what this episode should be called. But it's a lot of reading. It's a lot of cards. I would also say that it was interesting too. The dynamic is looking at face value of these cards. I'm going to say the accessibility portion. I'm going to kind of lean into that a little bit. Me speed bumping over the word initiative. These cards were hard to evaluate, not incorporating this secondary game piece, ultimately, right? Not me, ignorance is bliss, not understanding that this fourth dungeon and, in fact, what it did to actually make these cards much better than they actually read on their faces. Because for me, like a little vigilance, little trample just didn't take that slot equity over something like, why would I ever take some form of a rabble master and ever put, this barbarian in here, the Caves of Chaos Adventurer? Why were people so enthralled with that, right? It just didn't resonate with me or stick with me as a curator. So I think this is a good lesson for me to learn that maybe I should get those rose tinted glasses off sometimes, and it's okay. It's a little bit of lessons learned here on my part. I would also say that, Chris, to reiterate your stance on this is, in my opinion, the highest tier of cubes, or a multiplayer-centric type of cube. I wouldn't go tossing this around just because it's uncommon and try it. I mean, you could try it out in your peasant, rock on with your bad self, but the outcome is probably pretty substantial.
I do know that there are peasant and pauper curators who run these, which is fine if that's what they want to do. There are a lot of people that love to run the highest power level with the restrictions that they have given themselves, which I think is totally fine. I have no problem playing those cubes. I have no problem with doing any of that, but it's just not what I want for my environments.
So of all the cards that we mentioned, White Plume Adventurer, Seasoned Dungeoneer, Caves of Chaos Adventurer, and Undermountain Adventurer, the 4 of those cards are all rare. Feywild Caretaker is uncommon.
Yeah. Yep. I think it ultimately boils down to those stats. That 4 colorless plus 1 blue really is probably a lot more fair-ish in a peasant environment or something like that when you're just leaning on a few rocks here and there. But in a Power Vintage Cube, having seen Chris just power this out in 2 turns or 1 turn essentially, right? You don't really get
turn
to
2,
you don't get to do that typically. So I could see this maybe this would be like a high-powered peasant cube, like a Emma part throw type of cube, right? Where you could actually pull this off because the environment matches it.
Well, if you think about the set it came in, it was designed to be a multiplayer set, as you said. And a 5 mana you'll get to it in a game, no problem. And when you would draft a 4-player multiplayer game, because we played probably about a half dozen to a dozen games of that, and you always got, the games went long. Then cards like this were really good in that, but they weren't like to the effect of what happened in our game. Like it didn't happen like that. You were playing it on turn 5, 6, 7, 8. You weren't playing it on turn 2. So,
and even if you are, like, who cares? Are you unhappy to be playing this on turn 5 or turn 6 or turn 7 or whatever? I'm never going to be unhappy about playing a 3/4 flyer. All right, the land maybe at that point isn't as critical. Maybe at that point, if I'm top decking, maybe the scry is a little bit more important depending on the life totals. But I'm never unhappy to draw it. Doesn't matter what's going on.
No, of course not. Well, the lava axe part of it in the dungeon, think about it. You're playing against 3 other players with 40 life each. It's not as big. It's not as monstrous as it is in a 1v1 game where you start at 20.
Yeah, and going back to our good friend Alex's The Squares That Cube episodes, it's the Minx and Boo episode. I believe it's technically their second episode, episode 1, but they did a pilot. But the correlation that he made in that particular episode is that these cards designed for commander environments and multiplayer environments have found their way being seeded into these 1v1 environments, and they've created these dynamics which are appealing to curators like yourself and myself wanting to pull, Monarch and all these high-powered. But there is definitely a certain amount of, we need to make good choices, I guess, is what I'm saying, to make sure that we don't warp our environments, because cards like this too are kind of like, they're lightning in a bottle, right? So I think from my perspective, I wouldn't introduce this unless my environment can handle it. That's what I'm saying, right? Like if you have a way to combat this, if you have a heavy creature-centric environment, say with the let's just say White Plume Adventurer, and you took the initiative and there's a chance that your opponent can take it back and it creates this volley, it could be fascinating, right? It could incentivize these interesting turn sideways dynamics. But if you're like a really creature light environment and the one person happens to draft that, it could be kind of like our scenario where I'm trying to storm off and I can't because I have to stop what I'm doing because I'm dead on board.
Yeah, if you were playing aggro or something like that, I think it'd be a very different game. I think you were playing something more of a mid-rangey, more of an aggressive deck. I think it would be that would have been a lot different of a game.
Yeah, and like this sorcery speed storm mirror match versus a guy with brain freeze in his hands also scaring me simultaneously. And on that note, Stu, can you take us over to our socials?
Absolutely. First of all, as always, I want to give a huge shout out to our patrons, Keaton Schultz, Lord Justice, Chris Singer, Nick Lapointe, Stephen Conifal, Preston, and Sam McKenna. Thank you to all of you guys for your ongoing support. It really means a lot to the channel. As always, if you really enjoyed this episode and any other episode, we would really appreciate a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. You can also support the show by using our affiliate link with Ultasleeves, ultasleeves.com/UberCube. Get 5% off your purchase.
And UberCube has some news. It's currently in the works. We've got our local game store, The Gathering Place, located in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, April the 27th. We're going to be hosting a UberCube event. It's going to be 64 players, 8 cubes. Top 8 goes to battle with my Powered Vintage Cube, which will now have the initiative in it, and Storm, and probably Doomsday. TBD on that one. Probably, maybe, and maybe Escape Shift. I'm getting a little wild now. He's opened up my eyes. I want to try all kinds.
I know this is right in the middle of the socials. Like we've got
getting
time for this.
nutty, nutty here.
Well, I'll say this: if you're going to put Doomsday in the cube, I'll give it a go.
You got to put Thassa's Oracle in too.
Yes,
already got it.
There we go. If you want to support the show, you can also use our Inked Gaming affiliate. Go check them out. Get some really cool custom playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, all kind of cool products for your Magic experience. If you want to reach out to us on Twitter, we are at UberCubeMTGPod. You can also find us via Gmail at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. If you've got a comment about one of our episodes, or if you've got a comment or suggestion for a future episode, we'd love to hear from you. Discord, I'm not just going to say go #UberCube. We've got a link to our Discord. It's in our show notes. It's on our Twitter. It's all over the place now. And if you need a link, then just come check out maybe the Facebook Cube channel.
MTG Drafting, yes.
Yeah, MTG Drafting.
It's gotten huge. Well over 800 people in there. It's getting pretty big. And to loop back onto this event that we're hosting, as the details come forward, we'll release it. Soon we will have an actual flyer. The store is working on it. Prize support, raffles, going to be karaoke. It's going to be an all-day event with some other special stuff that we're working on. It's going to be a blast. So mark your calendars. April the 27th. As soon as it comes up with digital purchase capability, I will be posting it on every social, as you know. And we're also, the secondary plan right now, also TBD in the works. This is very loosey-goosey details, but whenever you fall out of a draft in the actual competition, air quotes, we will have other cubes for you to fall back on that you can just play.
Lots of side events.
We are going to cover you with side events galore. It's going to be fun. We've got a lot of cubes amongst us.
That's right.
With initiative.
That's right. Finally, we've got the initiative to play.
Anthony gets the initiative. That's ultimately what this episode is about. This episode has been brought to you by the letter I. And other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is Happy Cubing. One more time with vigor. Happy Cubing. We can't get Chris to say it. Why is Chris not saying it?
I just did.
Happy Cubing.
I said it all wrong.